What would you know about running a business? You were a military lawyer, not a CEO. That was the first thing they said when I walked into the room. No one flinched, not even me. My name is Elise Tran. I'm 37 years old. I've served in courtrooms most people will never see. I've drafted contracts that decide the fate of companies with more zeros than egos. But to them, I was still just the older daughter. The quiet one, the one who walked away. They thought I was back to ask for a seat. They were wrong. I wasn't here to take anything. I was here to sign off. They held the meeting at the firm's downtown office. The one with the skyline view, walnut trim, and art they never understood but paid too much for. Dad sat at the head of the table, naturally, still wearing the same cufflinks he bought after the company's first $1 million year. Mom beside him, calm, crisp, and practiced. Ivy, the golden one, already seated near the projector, flipping through slides like she owned the air in the room. There was a seat for me too, pushed slightly away from the table. The kind of seat that says, you're here, but not really part of this. I didn't complain, I just sat. Straight spine, closed folder, quiet eyes. Dad cleared his throat, looked around like he was announcing a campaign. As you all know, it's time we begin the formal transition. Ivy has demonstrated excellent initiative, and it's clear she understands where this company is headed. He looked at her like a man proud of his investment. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She's modern, intuitive, social media fluent, exactly the energy we need for this next chapter. Then came the part that was meant for me. And Elise, we're so proud of the work you've done overseas. Your legal insight is impressive, really, but this. He gestured around the table like it was sacred ground. This is business, and you've been elsewhere. Elsewhere? That was always the word they used when they didn't know where to put me. Not failed, not unqualified, just inconvenient. I nodded once. No smile, no shift in tone, because I knew this play. I'd seen it before, just never from this close. They thought this was the moment they handed over power. They didn't realize they were about to hand it to someone who couldn't hold it. They always said Ivy was born for this. She had the charisma, the energy, the gift of saying exactly what people wanted to hear at exactly the right volume. They called her a natural, and me, I was disciplined, diligent, low maintenance. Those were compliments, apparently. They forgot who used to sit with Dad on weekends, highlighting contracts he didn't want to read, who caught the supplier clause in 2010 that saved us from default, who restructured the employee equity plan when the firm hit a cash flow crisis before I turned 25. But I didn't take credit, because I didn't need it. Back then, I thought contribution was enough. I stayed up late writing policy drafts no one remembered I'd written. I reviewed quarterly filings while Ivy was planning office happy hours. I got certified in arbitration while they called me too serious. I left for the military not because I wanted distance, but because I thought service might earn respect in a way presence never had. And when I came back, I didn't come home to a banner or a seat at the table. I came back to voicemail. They didn't mean to forget me. They just never bothered to remember what I'd done. But I remembered. Every overlooked detail, every missed thank you. Every time they praised Ivy for polishing something I'd already built. And while they were busy crafting her image as the future of the company, I was building something else, a memory and a plan. When I left the military, I didn't announce it. No Facebook post. No champagne dinner. Just a quiet red-eye flight and a stack of letters I never sent. I didn't go home. I went to DC. A recruiter had reached out months before. Small firm, big clients. They needed someone who could handle complex litigation with zero ego and zero room for error. That sounded like me. Within a year, I was drafting international compliance policy for a defense contractor larger than my family's entire operation. 2 years later, I wasn't just reviewing deals. I was negotiating them. I didn't build a LinkedIn brand. I built a reputation. The kind that gets you looped into meetings 2 time zones ahead of everyone else. The kind that makes billion-dollar firms ask you to read the fine print no one else even sees. Then, last fall, Griffin Capital called, private equity, quiet, aggressive, and surgical. They were preparing a regional acquisition, manufacturing sector, family-owned, mid-size firm with legacy branding but unstable leadership. I opened the file, Tran and Sons Industries. My breath didn't catch. My hand didn't tremble. I just read, slowly, thoroughly, like I always did. I didn't tell Griffin I had history with the target. I didn't have to. I disclosed what was ethical. I recused where I should. But they still handed me the file. Still gave me lead review authority. Because they trusted one thing above all else, that I'd never let emotion cloud strategy. They were right. But my family had made one mistake. The kind they'd never seen coming. They thought I'd been gone. But I was never gone. I just stopped playing a role in a room where I was never meant to stay silent. And now, I wasn't just back in the conversation. I was the one who'd be signing the deal. By the time Ivy took the floor, the coffee was cold and the room smelled like polished wood and overconfidence. She stood like she'd practiced it, shoulders back, blazer sharp, voice perfectly modulated. We're finalizing branding updates for Q2, reviewing automation options for the logistics wing, and exploring outside capital from strategic partners. Strategic partners, that was the phrase she used. No one said Griffin yet, which was interesting considering the due diligence packet had been sitting on her desk for 2 weeks. Dad looked proud, not just proud, relieved. Like he'd spent years shaping a legacy, and now it had a face he could put on the company brochure. Mom nodded along, lips pursed like she was watching a debutante perform well under pressure. No one looked at me, and I didn't ask for their attention, I just listened. We've had light contact with Griffin Capital, Ivy said smoothly, but we're being cautious. These firms love to promise the moon and lowball during final terms. That made me smile. Not visibly, not disrespectfully, just inside where the irony had room to breathe. Because Griffin hadn't made any promises, not to them anyway, Dad turned to her, beaming. You've done your homework, sweetheart. We just want to make sure we keep decision-making in the family. He said we, but we all knew what he meant. Then he looked at me, for the first time since I'd walked in. Elise, we appreciate you being here. And of course, we'll loop you in when the legal review is necessary. For now, just sit back and observe. Observe, that word again. The one they used when they wanted my presence, but not my participation. I glanced at the projector, saw the bullet points, the projections, the fluff, and I realized they hadn't read the deal. Not really, because if they had, they'd know they weren't in charge of it, not anymore. Dad kept talking, something about stewardship, vision, trust, the kind of language people use when they're trying to make exclusion sound noble. Ivy nodded at all the right moments. She didn't look smug. She didn't need to. This was already hers. In their minds, I let it play out, every slide, every projection, every compliment that circled the room and landed, predictably, in her lap. Then Dad turned back to me. Elise, anything you'd like to add, from your legal perspective? He didn't mean it. It was a courtesy. A final tick box before they moved on. I closed the folder in front of me. Just one thing, I said calmly. You may want to confirm who's reviewing your merger contract on Griffin's side. The air changed. Dad blinked. Ivy shifted. Mom stopped mid-reach for her glass. What do you mean? Ivy asked, smile faltering. I looked at her, direct, steady. You said you've had light contact. That surprises me, considering I've been leading legal oversight on the deal for 6 months. Silence, the real kind. The kind that makes even the lights seem louder. Dad leaned forward. You, what? I'm the lead legal advisor on Griffin Capital's side. I've already reviewed your financials, vendor history, and executive succession drafts. Twice. Ivy's mouth opened, then shut again, like her brain couldn't quite connect the words with the woman sitting across from her. You're kidding. I'm not. I didn't raise my voice, didn't smirk, didn't gloat. Because I wasn't here to surprise them. I was here to remind them. They were never paying attention. No one moved. Not Dad, not Ivy, not the assistant in the corner who had been typing nonstop since the meeting started. The room wasn't just quiet, it was adjusting to a version of reality they hadn't prepared for. Dad was the first to speak. This is highly unusual, You didn't tell us." "No one asked," I said simply. Ivy leaned forward, her tone defensive. "But you're our sister. Isn't that a conflict?" "No, I disclosed the relationship. I recused myself from all Tran family-tied financial benefit. Everything documented, transparent, clean." She opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. "Griffin didn't hire me because I'm your sister," I added. "They hired me because I'm excellent, because I don't miss what other people overlook." Dad shook his head slowly, more in disbelief than denial. "Why wouldn't you tell us?" I looked at him, not bitter, not vindictive, just clear. "Because you already decided who I was a long time ago, and nothing I said would have changed that." Mom looked down at the table. Her hand trembled ever so slightly around the stem of her glass. Even Ivy had stopped blinking. I sat there, still, steady, not victorious, just done performing, because they weren't just stunned by my presence at the table. They were stunned by the idea that I'd built one of my own. Without ever needing theirs, I looked around the room and saw it. Not guilt, not shame, just the slow, dawning realization that I had never been gone, they had just stopped looking. I could have leveraged the moment, I could have asked for a board seat, I could have demanded oversight, made them squirm, made it hurt, but I didn't come for that. "I'm not here to take anything back," I said quietly. "I'm here to tell you what no one else has." I turned to Ivy. "You've got confidence, you've got charm, but that won't hold when the numbers don't. You're not ready. And if Griffin wasn't willing to say that to your face, well, now someone has." She looked like she wanted to argue, but there was nothing left to stand on. I turned to Dad. "This company deserves leadership grounded in clarity, not nostalgia. Legacy doesn't excuse inexperience." His mouth twitched, caught between defense and reflection. "I'm not trying to embarrass anyone," I continued. "But you can't call something a transition if the person receiving it doesn't know how to carry it forward." I closed the folder in front of me, gently, like I'd just finished grading a paper no one wanted reviewed. "Griffin will proceed, but they'll include a 6-month oversight clause, my recommendation." More silence, I stood up. "You don't have to agree with me, but from now on, you will acknowledge me." And that was all I needed. Not validation, not applause, just visibility. Because sometimes the win isn't reclaiming what they gave away. It's reminding them you never needed their permission in the first place. I didn't wait for a response. Not from Dad, not from Ivy, not even from the assistant who finally stopped typing as if unsure whether the meeting was still happening. I just gathered my notes, the ones no one bothered to ask about, and slid them back into my folder. No fanfare, no drop the mic moment, just quiet and the click of a magnetic clasp. Mom rose slightly from her seat. "Elise." I turned toward her, not cold, just centered. "It's okay, I didn't come for a scene, I came to be clear." And that clarity had arrived. Not like thunder, but like the absence of noise after years of polite silence. I walked to the door. Still no one followed. And that, somehow, was the loudest moment of all. Because it wasn't rejection anymore, it was recognition. The kind that doesn't come with a speech or an apology, just stillness. They didn't ask me to stay, and I didn't need them to. The people who once labeled me, the one who left, finally saw what they'd done all along. They never made room. So I built my own. And now that they'd seen what that looked like, they'd never be able to unsee it. Not in next quarter's meeting. Not in future leadership plans. Not even in the mirror. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't break ties. I just walked out. And left the air different behind me. I didn't go back to the family office. Not the next day. Not the next month. Not when the merger was finalized or when the leadership shuffle hit the trade press. They called a few times, voicemails dressed as olive branches, but I didn't respond, not because I was bitter. Because I was building, 3 blocks from the Griffin Capital office, on the quiet side of the city, where the coffee shops remember your name, and no one cares what your last name is. I signed a lease on a narrow, sunlit space with concrete floors and clean lines. No plaques, no portraits, no legacy logos. Just a glass door that reads, Elise Tran Strategic Counsel. No and associates. No inherited weight, just me present, whole and unedited. I hired 2 people. Not because I needed to scale, because I wanted the kind of team I never had. The kind that asks, "What do you think?" and waits to listen. Ivy sent one message. "Hope we can reconnect sometime, maybe even collaborate." I read it, paused, deleted it without replying, because the truth is I didn't need to be invited anymore. I wasn't chasing reconciliation. I was building rhythm, stability, impact. I didn't want their table back. I was finally sitting at one that made sense. And this time, no one was allowed to shrink me to fit the chair. For years, they told the story the same way. Ivy was the future, I was the detour. She stayed, I left. She rose, I drifted. And for a long time, I let them. Not because I believed it, but because I was tired. Tired of trying to rewrite a narrative written by people who never asked how I got here. But I wasn't behind. I was never behind. I was building something they weren't looking for. In places they didn't understand. On timelines they couldn't measure. They celebrated speed. I chose precision. They liked loud wins. I built quiet foundations. And when they called me distant, what they meant was, "You no longer need us to define you." They were right. I don't measure worth in titles or tables. I don't chase applause in rooms that only clap for one kind of success. I don't need to catch up, because I was never trying to match their pace. I was walking a different map entirely. And the next time someone looks at you and says, "You're not where you should be," remember this: maybe you're not late. Maybe they're just early to a story they were never invited to tell. I'm Elise Tran. I was never lost, just underestimated. And now that they've finally seen me, they'll never unsee me again.